The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
These guys aren't playing around. It's time to put the books away and get in the room. It's time for Wrestling Recess. Now your hosts, Dyson Gould and Dom Deputy. PA Power Wrestling. Pennsylvania is wrestling.
What's up, guys? This is Dominic Deputy back here for another episode of PA Power Wrestling Recess. Today, my guest will be two-time PIAA state champion and two-time All-American Hayden Hidlay. So, Hayden, how's it been going?
Oh, it's been pretty interesting to say the least. These past few weeks have been a bit of a challenge, but I'm doing pretty well here. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina with my two brothers. We've been trying to pass the time. It's been a little bit busy of late. This is our last week of classes or so. So just getting some assignments turned in, working out in creative ways. It has been pretty much a topic that we've been addressing the past few weeks. But it's been interesting. But I've been blessed.
Now, speaking of your working out, how has that been going for you?
It's been interesting. I've had to change up a lot how I've worked out. That time has been pretty few and far between. I have a couple sections back at my home in Lewistown, Pennsylvania. And so Trent and I have been able to roll around the mats there, but not really anywhere else is open. So we've kind of had to change up our workouts a little bit. I've been doing more running. It's been nice for me just so I can kind of go out by myself and clear my head and still get something out of it. Running long distances isn't necessarily a great tool set for wrestling, in my opinion, but I think just trying to find ways to stay in shape, it has been important recently. And so I've kind of done more running now than I ever have in my entire life. I've also tried to keep my lifting patterns as good as I can. I'm not going to be able to have the same equipment as I'm used to at the NC State weight room, but I do have some barbells and plates where I've been able to do most of your kind of basic weight room exercises like clean squats and deadlifts. I've been able to do the basic stuff.
Now, how do you feel about, you were one of the favorites to win the bracket at NCAAs. How do you feel about that being canceled?
It's a challenge for sure. I think it's a very emotional time to have something that you've been working towards taken away from you kind of right as you can see it. I feel like I was, catching my stride at the ACC tournament. I feel like I had a really good second half of the year. And I was prepared for Minneapolis. But I think circumstances change. And it's not like I'm being singled out. Nobody has anything personally against me that I didn't get to wrestle. I think all of us are in the same sort of situation. And so although the year is pretty much gone and I won't get it back, I will take a lot that I've learned from this year and be able to apply it next year. What I've told a lot of people is just I'm thinking about next year's national championship just being worth double. And so in my mind, whatever happens next year, I'm just going to apply it twice. So, you win nationals next year, it's worth two national tournaments. And so that's kind of what I tell myself to keep myself from getting down in the dumps about it. But it's obviously pretty sad. I think just the sense that you were almost there, like you were about to take off on your plane, but them saying, you're not allowed to go in. That's kind of a tough situation to deal with. But I think all of us are in the same boat, and whoever can get over that sadness quickest is going to be kind of a front runner for next year.
Did you see the cancellation coming at all, or was it out of the blue to you?
I think we all saw it coming, especially after they announced that there wouldn't be any fans there. I think we were all just waiting at the edge of our seats and whenever they were going to eventually call it off, because all the basketball tournaments were being canceled. And so if they weren't having any of the basketball tournaments, there's a very good shot they weren't going to be having the wrestling tournaments as well. So I think we all sort of felt it coming, even though we were we did have a little bit of hope. We were holding on to that as much as we could, but in the end, it didn't look too good. I think because we saw how many changes they have been making, and at some point, there's not a whole lot you can do anymore. So, yeah, I guess I wasn't too surprised by the cancellation.
How are you and your team staying connected?
Well, we've been meeting twice a week on Zoom with our entire team and coaching staff. They've done a good job at having guys on the team kind of paired up with a coach that they're looking after them. So me, my brother, and a couple of the other guys are with Ian. He's been kind of looking out after us. And so we'll have like a group of 5, and we'll meet with him like two times a week, but we'll keep him updated on how our school is going and how our training is going. And, it's going to take a lot of individual effort in these next few weeks and months. But we have a lot of resources at play right now where the coaches are trying to help us out. So, we were able to get in contact with our strength coach and kind of get a strength plan based on what materials and like equipment we have at our homes. And, we've just been able to get guidance from our coaches on a pretty daily basis on what we can do to keep up with our training. And I think the most important thing is just to stay together as a team throughout all this. And we've been able to meet twice a week as a whole team. And that's nice because you're just so used to being with your team all the time. Especially for a Division I wrestling team, you're there 12 months out of the year for the most part, and you're meeting almost every day with those guys. So it becomes a second family almost. And I think it's just important for us to keep our team culture and keep our team unity going forward. And so I think we've been doing a good job at that.
Now, on to your youth wrestling career. How did you get into the sport?
I got into the sport whenever I was 6. My family growing up never did any wrestling or anything like that. My dad, he played college football and college golf. And so we were always like involved with sports, but wrestling never kind of stuck out to me. What happened basically was whenever I was walking home from school, a lot of the older guys in my neighborhood were wrestlers. And so that they kind of like challenged me to come out for the team almost. And I'd played a bunch of sports with them, like, pick up basketball or backyard football or whatever. But, they looked at me and kind of wanted to see me on the wrestling team. And so I kind of took that as a challenge and I did it. And so the first day of wrestling practice, I can still remember it. My dad took me there and he didn't really think I was going to last too long just because, we had been a family of basketball players or what else. And, I really enjoyed it though. And so I've been doing it ever since.
What were the other sports that you played?
I played football up until I was in 9th grade or 8th grade. And I played baseball up until I was in 8th grade. I did a little bit of cross country as well earlier in my high school. That's about it. But I've always wrestled.
What was your favorite at the time?
I always would say wrestling was my favorite just because that was my best sport. I always was a little bit undersized in football and baseball. But I really enjoyed that just because it was nice to do in the summer, and I enjoyed playing with my brothers. They were both really good at both of those sports, and so it was kind of nice to be involved with our whole family with that. My dad was my football coach and my baseball coach, and so that was always pretty enjoyable. It was always just a family outing for us to do that. But again, I was really tiny, and I think there was a point when I was in junior high, I just wasn't growing. I was probably, 100 pounds going up against guys that were starting to get really big. And I kind of noticed then that maybe I need to start focusing on wrestling a little bit more because, I don't know, it's kind of hard to get by being 5'2" whenever you're a high school football player. So I sort of gave those up. I did enjoy them at the time, but I just wanted to focus more on wrestling, and I could start to kind of see a future in the sport whenever I was in 8th or 9th grade. I started doing really well in off-season tournaments, and I thought that I could really make something out of my athletic career if I just focused on wrestling. And so I really started picking up Freestyle and Greco at that point.
What clubs did you grow up going to?
Whenever I was a kid, I went to Cherto's a lot. That's where I met Ian. He helped coach out there. And then so once I started getting older, I went to Bison Legend Wrestling Club. They operated out of Bucknell and a couple other high schools. And also in high school, I went to Matttown, which is in Lock Haven. So I was driving a good bit to go to these clubs, but there I met a lot of great friends, and I had incredible training partners, especially being able to go to Bucknell and Lock Haven. I was able to wrestle with a lot of the college guys at Bucknell and Lock Haven guys as well. So I think just getting that exposure at a young age, that helped me out a lot, especially whenever I was in 9th or 10th grade, getting to wrestle older guys and also college-age guys. I think that was pretty cool. And so I had a really great club experience growing up.
Who were some of those partners that you did have?
So whenever I would go to Bucknell, I would get to wrestle Tyler Smith, who was a state champ from Franklin Regional. He did really well at the national tournament. Some of the assistant coaches, maybe like Marble at the time at Bucknell, was also a great help. I think just a lot of different guys that I can't remember at the top of my head. But then also going over to Lock Haven as well, and you could I think I wrestled with Ronnie Perry a few times, being able to go to those clubs, and that was pretty special to me, especially just being able to kind of get the knowledge and the mentality of college wrestlers is much different than high school at the time. And so you definitely took some beatings there, but I got to learn a lot from guys like that.
When did your brother start to tag along and go with you?
Well, we were always kind of together. We always made those trips, and I think whenever he got to probably 8th or 9th grade is whenever he started taking it really seriously. And he was spending a lot of time with me in the off season going to these clubs. And we were always right around the same size too. So we had each other as training partners whenever we were at home. And then whenever we would go to club practice, he was able to wrestle other guys around his age and also wrestle with the older guys around my age. And whenever I was in high school, we had this great group with me, Kent Lane, Cole Walter, trying to think who else. But all of us were state champions, and so we just were able to get a lot out of wrestling with each other. And I think Trent wrestled with those guys as well, and so it was a great mix of partners that we got.
Now, you mentioned going to all these clubs. Did your parents play a big role in that?
Yeah, definitely. If it wasn't for them driving us around everywhere, we weren't going to see the success that we had, and so they were very selfless in terms of doing everything they could to give us the right opportunity to succeed. And they were big in driving to, it sometimes would be an hour away to go to practice. And that's how it was whenever we would go to Bucknell or going to Lock Haven to wrestle at Matttown. It was sometimes 3-4 times a week they would help us out in that manner. And then kind of once me and Trent got our license, it was a little bit easier. We were able to take other guys on our high school team, but I mean, from age 6 to 15, that they were constantly driving us around the state to tournaments and practices, and then taking us nationally to events as well.
Now, you spoke of wrestling, freestyling Greco. Did you have much success in that?
Yeah, I did pretty well. I went to Fargo, I want to say 4 times, and the one year I got double second. That was whenever I was a cadet. I got second in freestyle and second in Greco.
Because Zahid Valencia, correct?
Yeah, I lost to Zahid twice in both of those. And then I also got first in Greco before my senior year, and got third in freestyle that same year. So I had pretty solid credentials in freestyle in Greco, but that was probably my best performance was whenever I won Greco before my senior season. I did really well there.
Did you have a lot of success in folk style too early on?
I would say so. I think my freshman year of high school, I didn't place the state tournament, but I placed the state tournament 3 times, my sophomore, junior, and senior year, and I ended up winning it my senior year. But I guess even going back to like youth wrestling, I did pretty well at the state tournaments there. Looking back now, it's kind of interesting to see how the results played out just because I wrestled a lot of really good guys back then. I want to say I probably lost to Spencer Lee 3 different years in a row. I got third twice, and both times I wrestled him in the semis, and he beat me. I also lost to Vincenzo Joseph in the finals one of those years. And so I think it's just cool to look back and see those guys I lost to. I want to say I placed, 6 times at PJWs. I won it once. But looking back, it was just cool how many good guys I got to wrestle back then and how well they ended up doing later on.
What is something you wish you would have done differently in your childhood wrestling career?
I don't have too many regrets about how I went about things like in my middle school, high school, and youth career. One thing I took me a long time to figure out was just I didn't have to cut weight. I felt like my freshman year of high school I did too much of that. I was kind of sucked out, and I just thought that in high school that you had to cut weight, but it's not necessarily the case. I probably would have gone back my freshman year and tried to wrestle at a weight class higher. I did fine that year. I just it took me a long time to figure it out. I just wasn't mature enough to make a good decision, I think, in terms of like weight cutting. And I kind of drained on me, and I didn't necessarily have as much juice as I would have liked come postseason. And I think it kind of showed a little bit when I got to States. I felt a little bit drained from the season, and the season it kept going on and on and on. And I was just kind of, waiting for it to end almost at the end. And, that's no way to go about wrestling. And I think going back, I would have changed some things up and maybe not put so much emphasis on cutting weight and more on just kind of training and doing better against bigger guys. And I think there was some fear back then that I was too young to wrestle up in weights. And so I kind of let that fear cripple me and not necessarily focus on my wrestling. And I just kind of felt like I had to cut weight to gain an advantage against guys. And, that's definitely one thing I would like to change.
Now, on to high school. Who was your main practice partner?
Well, I had some good ones in high school for sure. I think in the club scene, I wrestled a lot with Cole Walter from Mifflinburg. He was a state champ, and Kent Lane, who was a state champ for Southern Columbia. But in my home gym and my high school team, we had a lot of good guys. Noah Stewart, he was a 2-time state placer. He ended up wrestling for West Point, and he had a really great career there. So I had him to wrestle with. I had my brother to wrestle with. And then also my head coach was very active, and I was able to wrestle with him a lot too. And so I had a really great training situation. And, I had another guy who was really solid wrestler in Ike Underhill. He was there I got to wrestle with him my first 3 years in high school. And so I think my training situation was really good. I had, multiple state placers I got to train with on a daily basis.
What kind of relationship did you have with your teammates and coaches?
It was great. I really think that as time went on, especially, we grew together even more. I think as our team got really good, I think we started to become even better friends. And my freshman year, I was really young, and I didn't have as many of those friends on the team. And but those guys kind of took me under my wing at that point. And then as the years went on, my brother joined the team. Some of the guys in my class were having great success. And I think some of my favorite memories in high school wrestling was just being able to share with those guys at the state tournament. We would roll in with like 6 or 7 different guys wrestling at the state tournament. And the highest finish that we had was my senior year. Our team got 3rd. We finished 3rd behind Becca and Nazareth. And I think that was just a really, really solid team that people forget about sometimes. But we really enjoyed having each other there. And, the success was great, but I think the memories we made along the way was even better.
Did you get nervous going into big tournaments like the state tournament?
Yeah, especially I did. I think now in college, there's not as many nerves. I think just because you mature and you realize that you've been there. But the Giant Center and the high school state tournaments is one of the most nerve-wracking places you can wrestle. And for me, I had 3 years there. My freshman and through junior year, I never won in the state quarterfinals. I lost each year there. And so there was a lot of nerves for that round, especially my senior year, because I didn't have any more chances to win the tournament. I hadn't won it yet. And so I think going out there, especially from the quarterfinal and semi and final rounds, there's definitely some nerves. But, I had prepared more than anybody else had in that bracket. And so I just needed to remind myself that, I was the front runner my senior year, and I just had to really believe that. I had to believe that I was better than the rest of those guys there. And, the nerves start to go away, especially after you go out in the first period and get a takedown pretty quick. And so I always made that a big thing at the state tournament, was try to get a quick takedown, and then my nerves would usually go away after that.
Your freshman, sophomore, and junior year, you fell short of the state title, but then you said your senior year you came back and won the tournament. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my freshman and through junior years, I always wrestled really good guys. My sophomore and junior years, I took losses to Michael Kemmerer in the quarterfinal round, and I just was in these stacked brackets. And so my junior year especially, we had the top 4 guys in that weight were in the top 5 nationally. And so my junior year, Kemmerer won. He was the number 1 guy in the country. Pat Dugan got second. He was top 5. I was top 5. I got 3rd. And then Verclaren was top 5 in the country, and he got 4th. And so that just showed me how, I had a tough draw in terms of how tough those brackets were. But I knew by the time I got to my senior year, there wasn't anybody there that was of that caliber that I had to face. And so I'd been prepared for that moment. And, I got to my senior year, and I just had a lot of confidence going into that tournament, just because I had wrestled all those good guys the year before and the 2 years before that, I didn't feel like there was anybody in my way that could stop me. And so although I had a couple rough state tournaments leading up to my senior year, it ultimately gave me the confidence I needed to end up winning that year pretty handily. I think I got a decision in the semis, but the rest of the matches I got bonus in. And so I was pretty dominant that senior year in my state tournament, but I just knew that, I had been through the fire, and I was prepared for that moment.
So now on to your college. Why NC State? What stood out about it?
I like the team culture they have at NC State, and they always are talking about pack mentality. And, I never knew what that was until I kind of took a visit here. And, what it is it's just a big group of guys, sprinting after the same goal. And I think it's really easy as a competitor and an athlete, if you have 30 other guys along your side chasing after the same thing, and coach is kind of leading you onto it, it's much easier to perform as an individual. And so I got here, and I just really trusted in the coach's vision they had for me. And, they told me coming in that I was going to become a national champion, and I could do what I wanted if I followed their guidelines and their vision. And I got, really happy about that, just because these guys were putting so much effort into having me on campus. And, I think just the pack mentality, that team culture really brought me here. I really enjoyed what those guys were about. They were tough people, and they worked out hard. And that was kind of what I was looking for in the end.
What other colleges offered for you?
I was interested in other schools like Purdue and Lehigh and Virginia Tech. But it was always NC State for me. I think they were always the front runner. And I committed rather early. I committed my junior year of high school. And in the end, it all worked out. I'm glad I did at that point. But yeah, it was always NC State from the get-go.
What is the main difference you felt from high school to college?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple things that happen. The one is just mat wrestling is so much better, I think, in college. I think you have to be able to get off bottom. And whenever you're a freshman in college, you're going to go into the practice room, and you're going to like be looking around for answers, but not being able to get off bottom at times. And I think it's important to go through that adversity, but the guys on top are just a lot better. I think the level of focus too is something that changes. In college, you've got 7 minutes in a match, and you have to be completely focused for that 7 minutes. I think in high school, sometimes you can get away with making mistakes. In college, you can too, but there's a much lesser kind of margin of error, I guess you could say, in college. You have to make sure that your attacks are pretty crisp, or they'll make you pay in college. I feel like guys' re-attacks are a lot better, and they're just kind of like their wrestling IQ is much higher. I think in high school, you're dealing with sometimes you'll probably have 70. If you're a really high-level guy, 75% of your matches you can kind of do what you want. And then the other 25%, the guys can scout you, and they have a high wrestling IQ. In Division I wrestling, it's like every match you have to be prepared to go out there because, in the big sense of things, you're probably wrestling against a state champ every time. A lot of guys in Division I are of that caliber. And so you just have to be pretty focused, I guess, going into every match.
What was your first practice like?
My first practice was pretty frustrating. I came in the summer, and I had actually wrestled one of the guys on our team in a freestyle tournament a few months before that. My senior year, I wrestled in a college tournament up at East Stroudsburg. It was like a university just open freestyle tournament, and I ended up winning that against all college guys. And one of the guys on my team was actually in that bracket, and I beat him. And then I came down to practice, and he kind of kicked the crap out of me the first summer practice. And I was like, I don't know how this makes sense. I had beat this guy in a match, and, here he was taking me down left and right. And it's just like, it's a hard thing to explain. But a college wrestling room, it takes a few weeks to get used to, because every single guy is so much better than you're used to. In high school, you might have one or two practice partners that can push you. But a college wrestling room has probably 10. And so, there were no easy goes, and you were constantly kind of had your back on the wall. And, that first week or so, it was pretty hard to get a takedown. I maybe got one or two takedowns the whole week of my first week in college wrestling. And that's kind of a hard like lesson to be learned as an 18-year-old kid going into college wrestling. But I went through that, and then like a couple weeks later, I started to pick everything up, and I had gotten to the point where I was one of the better guys in the room then. But I mean, there's a very struggling first couple weeks, and it's very humbling.
Can you talk a little bit about NC State's rise in the wrestling world?
Yeah, so whenever I was in high school and being recruited by NC State, I didn't really know a whole lot about them other than Nick Wisdowski. He had won a few national titles at that point. But my senior year in high school is whenever they really took off, and they had a year where they went to Iowa, they went to Oklahoma State, and they beat those guys. And they also beat Missouri in the same year. And so they had a really great team with senior leadership at that point. And then the next year, whenever I was coming in, was kind of like some of those guys were still on the team, but it was like a new wave, and they wanted me to be kind of like leading the charge of that new wave of guys. And so that first year that I was on campus, I took a redshirt year, and which was hard because I really wanted to help my team out, and I felt like I would have been valuable out there. But I'm glad they did wait, and they redshirted me. And then the next year, we went and we got top 4 at the national tournament as a team. And I think it's just been very consistent over the past 5 or 6 years. Pat's done a great job at getting the right people in place, and just bringing in really great recruiting classes. And so we're a perennial top 10 team now. It's one of my jobs. I got to, as a team leader, keep fostering that development and keep bringing in guys that want to be on a top 10 team and competing well at the national tournament.
How do you balance wrestling and academics?
Well, I think it's hard at first. Again, like going into college from high school, things can be a bit of a challenge. And I think for me, my first year in college was a little bit like that as well, especially in academics. I had one semester where I didn't really do well, and I felt really embarrassed by it. And I just had to really hunker down and manage my time a little bit better. I was always so focused on wrestling and how I could get ahead that I kind of took my mind off my academics, and I had a bad semester that I rebounded from. But I think when it comes down to it, just being able to spend your time wisely. I had spent so much time focusing on the wrestling aspect that I didn't spend enough time looking at my schoolwork that first year. So now I kind of have it figured out. It's just one of those things where as you grow older, you start to kind of block out your time using a calendar system. And that really helped me kind of take off academically. And I've had a really great academic career so far. And I think it just sometimes it takes one hard semester to learn from that.
If you could describe Coach Pat in one sentence, how would you describe him?
Pat is an intense but caring coach with an incredible skill for looking ahead to the future and having a strong vision. I think that'd be a great sense to describe him, just because he has such great leadership skills in terms of having a vision and having a mission and making sure everybody is accountable to attaining it. He's very intense in ways that we need him to be. He makes sure everybody is along with the goal and there's no outliers, because in terms of this program, we can't have guys that aren't fully bought in. And I think he does such a great job at creating this vision and creating these standards that we all follow him towards them.
What is it like having your brother at the same college as you?
It's great. I think we've spent so much time living under the same roof, and we haven't. Up until I was 18, we lived in the same room for every year of our lives. And so that's somebody that knows me so well, and I know him so well, that at times it can be a little bit challenging to navigate through that. But I mean, it's such a blessing, and we have to kind of remind ourselves that we get to live out our dream together. I've said that a lot just because, it's hard to go back in time, but I mean, if I would have thought when I was 12 years old I got to be on a great Division I wrestling team with my brother, I would have taken it back then. And so I think it's important for us to just remind ourselves that we're living out our dream together, and it's the best case scenario for us.
At the 2019 NCAA tournament, you felt Jason Dolphin a controversial call in the semifinals. How do you deal with adversity like that?
Well, I think it's just about going on to the next one. I think with a match that's as challenging as that was, I had spent so much time kind of, dreaming about the moment to take out a guy like that. And I put together a really good match. There's nothing I could hang my head about in that match. But, at some point you do have to move on from it. Even though it was a challenging match and there was some questionable call, it happens, with guys that are so close like that, on any given night, one takedown can win you the match. And, he was able to get a takedown and I couldn't. And so it's one of those things that you learn from, but you don't hang your head about, just because I know I put together a really good match that time. And, I did everything I could to win, but it just wasn't enough in the end. So I learned from that. And like I did in high school, I recognized that, my freshman through junior years, I had spent so much time wrestling these really good guys, but I wasn't able to ultimately succeed in the end. I've kind of taken that approach, and, I've wrestled Nolf twice. He got the better of me both times, but, there's nobody that I can wrestle next year that was as high level as he was. And so I've taken that as confidence. I was able to go up against the best guy, pound for pound, that I thought in the NCAA. And, I was able to do well against him. So I kind of take that as, I'm prepared for anybody else who comes, because I'd been through that. I'd been through the adversity of trying to beat him, but I couldn't. And so I just kind of take that along with me as preparation.
Do you foresee any coaching in your future?
Oh, I would love to. I would love to stay with this sport. My goal, I think, for the next year is to stay healthy. Be healthy for my last year and just work as hard as I possibly can at attaining success next year. And, I want to use up every bit of talent that I have. And at the end of my college career, I can make a choice then. But for now, I just want to focus on using every bit of gas I have left in the tank and really trying to achieve my goal of becoming an NCAA champion. And after that, I would really love to help others kind of reach their goal. I think I've noticed that here. A lot of our coaches got into coaching just because they weren't able to achieve their individual goals. I think they had been through that career as a competitor, but they still had more drive in them. They still kind of were left with a taste in their mouth that they want to help out other people. And, I have that same desire as well. And so I'd like to get into coaching as soon as I possibly could after wrestling is over.
I just have a couple more random questions for you. How would you describe what wrestling does for you?
That's a good question. I would say that wrestling just makes you a very confident person. I think you go through these very incredibly challenging workouts. And then whenever you go out into like the real world, as they say, you might be faced with these tasks or challenges that seem very hard at face value. But I think I'm constantly looking back to like our preseason workouts when things like that happen. Like whenever I have like a challenging paper I have to write, or I'm faced with a challenging situation in my personal life, I always go back to thinking, all right, I've put somebody on my back and carried them up a football stadium like 20 or 30 times before. And so you get this confidence in your head just because you've been able to you've been able to achieve these personal successes in these workouts that it leaves a lasting impression on me for certain. Like whenever I'm going through a really hard workout, I can always think about the light at the end of the tunnel. And, after those workouts, I can always gain strength and confidence from those. And I think that's definitely what wrestling gives you. Wrestling gives you a mental edge in terms of challenging things you have to face in the future.
What was your favorite college growing up?
Well, I actually had season tickets to Penn State wrestling growing up. I went to all of those matches up until I was like a senior, junior in high school. Some of my favorite memories, I think, was Zane Rutherford beat Logan Stever one time at Penn State. That was probably the loudest I've ever seen a wrestling match. But there was a lot of great wrestling matches that took place whenever I was like in junior high and high school at Penn State that me and my brother and parents went to. So I enjoyed going there growing up.
Who was your favorite wrestler?
I really enjoyed watching Quentin Wright growing up. I think just especially because he was a local guy. He went to Bald Eagle High School, which was like 30 minutes from me. He wrestled at Penn State and was able to win 2 national titles. I really enjoyed watching him wrestle, and I kind of took a lot of his technique, especially in stuff like underhooks, and I was able to apply it to my personal career. And so I always enjoyed watching him wrestle because it didn't really matter at the national tournament whether he was like the 1, 2, or 11 seed. He still showed up and did really well.
What advice would you give a wrestler who is just starting?
I would have a lot to say for sure, but I think the overarching piece of advice that I would give to a younger person is to not necessarily focus on how well you're doing in terms of accolades or titles that you're given. Like I look back at my career, and it wasn't necessarily the times that I won that I learned the most, but the times that I was challenged. And I always kind of went out and tried to wrestle the best guys. I never drew away from a challenge, and if I lost, it was whatever. I think it hurts in the moment, but looking back, the most valuable experiences I got as a wrestler was when I lost. And so I would just tell younger guys to just kind of face that and accept it. Try to wrestle the best guys you can, because I think later down the road you'll remember that, and that'll be kind of like a cause for your success more than anything. Like I can't help but think that me wrestling Spencer Lee and Vincenzo growing up and losing to them at PJWs didn't help me down the road. Or when I went to high school and I lost to Kemmer a bunch of times, I feel like that helped me down the road eventually.
Well, Hayden, that's all I got for you today. I had fun, and I hope you did.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great interview. I'm really happy to be on your podcast, especially. I think Trent was on a Recess podcast recently, and so we really appreciate what you guys are doing, and your guys' knowledge for the sports is incredibly high at such a young age, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yep.